Montana Territory, 1879. The snow had not yet fallen, but the cold in the wind said it would soon. Jacob McAllister spotted the woman just before dusk, a dark figure stumbling along the ridge beyond his property line, a child clutched to her chest. He pulled his horse to a stop. She was barefoot. Her dress was torn at the hem and soaked halfway up with mud. The child, no older than 4, was buried against her shoulder beneath a thin shawl. Jacob's heart tightened. There was no town for 20 miles, and no sane person wandered these hills without boots or direction. He nudged his horse forward. "Ma'am," he called out, voice low and steady. "Are you hurt?" The woman turned slowly, like she could barely lift her head, bruised lip, blood on her cheekbone. She swayed, then steadied herself and the child. "Please," she rasped. "We need help." He was off his horse by the time she finished the word. "I got you," he said, stepping close, hands raised so she would not startle. "Let me carry the little one." "No," her arms tightened. "She stays with me." "All right." "Can you walk?" She nodded, though she looked like she might fall any second. Jacob didn't argue. He slipped an arm around her waist, careful and firm. She didn't resist. They moved slow, step by step, until he got her up on his horse and took the reins. "Just lean on me," he said. "You are safe now." The ride back to his cabin was quiet. The child whimpered once, but Jacob only tightened his arm around both of them. His cabin sat near the pine edge, solid and warm, smoke curling from the chimney. He pushed the door open and guided them inside. "Sit down by the fire," he said. She moved straight toward it and sank onto the rug, pulling the child into her lap. Jacob grabbed a quilt from the cot and laid it gently over both of them. "I'll get water." She did not speak again until the girl was asleep in her lap and her hands had stopped shaking. "My name is Brielle Kersey," she said, voice rough. "Her name is Kira. She is my daughter." Jacob nodded. "Jacob McAllister, this is my land." "You are staying here now." Brielle looked up sharply. "We cannot stay. He will come looking." Jacob crouched beside her. "Who? My husband," she whispered. "Not by law, but he calls himself that. We ran. He hit Kira." Jacob's jaw clenched. "You do not have to go back." She shook her head. "You do not know him." "I do not need to." He stood up. "No one touches a child on my land. No one lays a hand on you, not ever again." Brielle looked at him like she had never heard words like that before, like she almost did not believe him. He brought her stew and bread. She fed Kira first, then ate with slow, cautious bites. They stayed the night. He gave them his bed and took the chair by the fire. In the morning, she tried to leave. "I cannot endanger you," she told him, wrapping Kira in the shawl again. Jacob stood in the doorway, blocking the path. "You are not endangering me, but you are endangering her if you go." Brielle's shoulders shook. She dropped her head against the doorframe. "Let us stay until the snow comes," she whispered. "Just until then." Jacob reached out and gently touched her arm. "You can stay as long as you need." "The two of you, you are safe with me." She nodded, not looking at him, but he saw the tears slide down her cheek anyway. Days passed. Then weeks. Jacob watched Brielle learn how to breathe again. She helped in the kitchen. She mended Kira's dress and made biscuits with shaking fingers. Kira clung to her mother but started smiling again when Jacob made funny faces or showed her how to feed the chickens. Brielle was quiet, but not cold. She listened when Jacob spoke and sometimes smiled when he told stories about his younger days. She kept her hair tied back, but it fell loose in the evenings after Kira was asleep. Jacob never said it, but he liked the way she looked then. Like herself, maybe. One night, close to the end of October, Brielle stood out on the porch wrapped in a shawl, staring at the stars. Jacob came up beside her, cold out. "I like the cold," she said. "It makes the air feel clean." He nodded, leaning against the post. "I have not felt clean in a long time," she said suddenly. Jacob looked at her. Her face was turned away, but her voice was steady. "I married young. Thought I was lucky, thought it would be different. Then he started drinking. Then he started hitting. When Kira came, I thought he would stop, but he just got meaner." She pressed her hands together. "I kept telling myself I had to stay, that I could survive for her, but then he hit her. And I knew I had to run." Jacob said nothing. He just watched her, his chest tight. I do not know who I am anymore, she said, her voice breaking. I have not known in years. He stepped closer. Well, I know who you are. She turned toward him, eyes searching. You are strong, he said. You are a good mother, and you are brave. Brielle looked like she might cry, but she did not. Instead, she reached out and took his hand. For the first time, she touched him. Jacob held her hand, warm and steady, and they stayed like that a long time under the stars. November came with frost on the windows and smoke in the chimney. Kira laughed more now. She followed Jacob around the yard and called him Mr. Jake, which made him smile every time Brielle baked bread. She sang softly to Kira at night. She and Jacob shared coffee in the morning and quiet looks in the evenings. One night, as the first snow fell, Jacob cleared his throat. I know you did not come here looking for anything, he said, nervous for the first time in years. But I feel like I found something I did not know I needed. Brielle looked at him, heart pounding. I want you to stay, not just through winter. I want you to be here with me, as my wife. She stared at him, stunned. I do not have much, he said, but you and Kira would have everything I got. My name, my home, my whole heart. Brielle stepped closer. Are you sure? She whispered. Jacob nodded. I have never been more sure. She reached up and touched his face, soft fingers brushing his jaw. I want that too, she said. I want to belong somewhere. I want Kira to grow up safe. I want to wake up beside someone who sees me. I see you, Jacob said, voice rough with emotion. I see all of you, and I love you. Brielle smiled through her tears. Then yes, I will marry you. They kissed beneath the falling snow, arms around each other, hearts full. And in that quiet Montana night, love finally found them both. The snow had flattened the world into silence, but inside the cabin, life stirred early. Jacob rose before light, careful not to wake the two sleeping shapes beneath the quilts. He pulled on his boots by the hearth, the floorboards cool underfoot. The fire had burned low in the night, its ember glow barely visible, but the room was still warm enough to hold the morning chill at bay. Outside, the air bit hard. He shoveled a path to the barn, breath ghosting in front of him. The mare nickered softly, and he rubbed her neck as he checked her water and hay. A few chickens clucked from their roosts, feathers puffed against the cold. When he stepped back toward the house, the sky was just beginning to pale, and smoke was curling up from the chimney again. Inside, Brielle was at the stove, her braid hanging down her back. Kira perched on a stool beside her, swinging her feet. You could have let me finish chores, she said without turning. I needed the quiet, Jacob replied, shaking snow from his coat. And you were sleeping. I hardly ever sleep past dawn, she said, pouring hot water into a tin basin. But I did today. He watched her stretch a cloth across her forearm to lift the kettle. Her sleeves were rolled to the elbow, hands steady now, not like in the first weeks. There was a rhythm to how she moved, a quiet confidence in how she measured flour or stirred the pot, like she was beginning to believe she belonged here. Kira looked up from her bread crust. Can I go outside later, if it warms? Brielle said, brushing a crumb from the girl's chin. Your fingers turned red yesterday. I'll take her out a bit after midday, Jacob offered. I've been meaning to check the traps along the creek. She could use the walk. Brielle hesitated. She doesn't like being far from me. I won't take her far. Just past the bend where the rabbit trails cross the cottonwoods. She'd like that, Brielle said after a moment. She hasn't walked in the snow before. Jacob nodded, then stepped to the basin. Let me wash up. She handed him the cloth, heat still in the fabric from her hands. There's a coat in the chest you might try for her. It's a bit big. It'll do fine. Later, as the sun sat low behind a veil of cloud, Jacob took Kira's hand and helped her down the path. She wore the two large coats, sleeves rolled, her mittens dangling from twine stitched into the cuffs. She didn't say much, but she looked up at him every so often, like she was still trying to decide what kind of man he was. You ever seen tracks like this? He asked, kneeling beside a line of prints in the snow. That's a hare. See how the back feet land ahead of the front? Kira nodded, then pointed. There's more. They followed the trail down toward the frozen creek where the traps were hidden beneath brush. One held a rabbit, stiff and still. Kira stepped back, her nose wrinkling. "He was quick," Jacob said, lifting the trap with careful hands. "But not quick enough. Will you eat him? Not today, he'll keep in the shed. You and your mama can decide what to do with him." Kira walked beside him in silence, then asked, "Did you have a mama?" "I did." "She was small like yours, soft voice, but she could tan a hide quicker than my pa," she grinned. "Did she sing?" "Every evening, hymns mostly, made the house feel like it was holding its breath." Back at the cabin, Brielle was scraping ice from the windows with a wooden spoon. She turned when they came in, her expression easing when she saw her daughter's rosy cheeks. "She did fine," Jacob said, hanging up his coat. "I see that." Brielle brushed snow from Kira's shoulders, then looked at him. "Thank you." He caught her gaze and held it longer than was necessary. It was no trouble. That night after supper, Jacob sat carving a length of pine while Brielle sewed near the fire. Kira had fallen asleep curled against a cushion, her thumb tucked beneath her chin. The only sound was the soft scrape of the blade and the quiet pull of thread through cloth. "What are you making?" Brielle asked without looking up. "A whistle. Thought Kira might like one. She's never had a toy," she said, eyes still on her stitches. "Not one that was hers to keep." He ran the blade along the curve of the wood. "Then it's time she did." A pause stretched between them, warm and full. "I was afraid you'd change." Her voice was low, almost lost beneath the crackle of the fire. "Why?" "Because men do. They're kind until they don't have to be." Jacob set the carving aside. "I'm not pretending, Brielle." She met his eyes. "I want to believe that. You can." Her hands stilled in her lap. "I don't know what to do with peace. I only know how to survive. Then let's learn the rest of it together." She blinked slowly, then reached out and took his hand, the one resting on his knee. Her fingers were cool, but she didn't pull away. "I'm trying," she whispered. "I see that," he said. "And I'm here." The fire burned low, the cabin wrapped in warmth and quiet. Outside, the snow kept falling, but inside, the air was clear and steady. By December, the snow lay deep enough to hush the sound of every footstep. Mornings were slow now, filled with the scent of coffee and the creak of the kettle chain. Jacob had begun rising a little later, not from idleness, but because Brielle had taken to warming Kira's feet by the hearth before breakfast, and he liked to sit quietly and watch them, mother and daughter curled together in the golden light, safe and still. One morning, Brielle stood by the window, holding a piece of paper folded into fourths. Jacob leaned in the doorway, wiping his hands on a cloth. "You write someone?" he asked gently. Her thumb traced the edge of the page. "My sister. She's in Iowa. We haven't spoken in years. You thinking of sending it?" "I don't know yet." He crossed the room and stood beside her. "What would you say?" "That I'm alive, that Kira is well, that I'm not the same woman she knew before." Jacob nodded and didn't press. She folded the paper again and slipped it into the pocket of her apron. That afternoon, while Kira napped, Brielle sat near the fire, mending the frayed cuff of Jacob's shirt. He watched her in quiet stillness, hands steady, brow furrowed in concentration. "You ever sew for others?" he asked, his voice low so as not to wake the child. She looked up. "I used to. When I was a girl, I stitched linens for a woman in town. She paid me in eggs and sugar. You've a fine hand for it." She smiled faintly. "It's the only thing my mother ever praised me for." Jacob moved from his chair and crouched beside her, resting his forearm along the edge of her seat. He didn't touch her, but he was close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. "You're more than what anyone ever said of you," he said. She looked down at her hands. "I'm still learning to believe that. Let me teach you then." Their eyes met, and the quiet stretched between them again, filled with something soft and certain. That evening, Brielle set a pot of beans to soak and began slicing salt pork. She moved with practiced ease, but Jacob noticed her pause once, hand still on the knife. She didn't speak, but he stepped near, waiting. "I used to flinch when he came through the door," she said after a moment. "Every sound made me jump. Now, when I hear you come in, I feel steady." Jacob didn't answer right away. He just reached for the bowl and began peeling a turnip beside her. "You ever think about what comes next?" he asked softly. She glanced at him. You mean beyond winter? I mean beyond survival. Brielle's hands stilled, then she nodded. I used to think a quiet life was something only other women got to have. But now I can't help but wonder what it'd be like to plant a garden come spring. Watch Kira run through it. Jacob's mouth lifted at the corner. There's good soil just past the barn. Gets sun most of the day. She looked up again, this time holding his gaze. You've given me more than I had any right to ask for. I didn't give it, he said. I offered it. There's a difference. That night, once Kira had been tucked in and the fire banked low, Brielle stood barefoot on the wooden floor, her shawl wrapped tight around her shoulders. Do you miss being alone? She asked. No, Jacob said, his voice low and certain. Not once since the day you walked onto my land. She stepped closer, the faint light from the fire catching in her hair. Then maybe it's time I take your name, he straightened, heart thudding. You sure? I am, she said. I want to be your wife, not just in deed, in name. In truth. Jacob reached for her hands, calloused fingers wrapping gently around hers. Then come spring, we'll stand before the preacher in town. I'll say it plain. You and Kira are my family now. Her eyes welled, but she didn't look away. I want Kira to grow up knowing what love looks like. She already does, he whispered. Every time you hold her, every time you sing to her when you think no one's listening. Brielle leaned forward, resting her forehead against his chest. Jacob wrapped his arms around her, holding her with the kind of care that asked for nothing in return. Outside, the wind moved across the white fields. But inside, the world had stilled again, not from snow this time, but from the peace that comes when two people, long weathered by life, choose to stay. The deep frost of January pressed into the seams of the cabin, but inside, the stove held strong and the days passed with quiet purpose. Jacob had begun building a cradle from pine boards salvaged from the old shed. Not because it was needed now, but because he'd seen Brielle pause each time she passed the empty corner by the hearth, her eyes lingering on the space without words. He didn't ask her about it, and she didn't say anything. But she began knitting small socks in the evenings. One morning, Jacob came in from the woods with a brace of quail and found Brielle standing at the table, smoothing a piece of muslin over a folded dress. Kira was outside with the neighbor's girl, bundled in wool and learning to press snow into bricks for fort walls. I've been meaning to ask, Jacob said, setting the birds down. You talked about your sister before. You think she might write back? I'm not sure she'd know what to say, Brielle replied, not looking up. We were close once, but when things turned hard, I stopped answering, didn't want her to see what I'd become. He stepped closer, wiping his hands on his trousers. Maybe she never stopped wondering. Brielle folded the muslin with care. Maybe, but I've made peace with it either way. Jacob watched her a moment before speaking again. I met your eyes the first day you came here. You were half-starved and still stood straight. That's not something you become. That's something you are. She gave a slow nod, then touched the edge of the table. There was a time I thought strength meant staying, that if I bore down hard enough it would break him instead of me. Now you know better. I do, she said. And I'll never forget again. Later that week, Kira came inside with a split lip and tears frozen on her cheeks. She'd fallen on the creek ice. It wasn't deep, but the cut bled bright and Brielle's hands trembled as she cleaned it. She's fine, Jacob murmured, kneeling beside them. Just a scrape. I know, Brielle said, voice tight, but it never leaves you, that panic. Kira blinked up at her. Mama, I didn't mean to fall. Brielle kissed her brow. I know, my love, you're brave. That night, once Kira was asleep, Jacob stepped outside to bring in more wood. When he returned, he found Brielle standing with her arms crossed, staring at the cradle frame he'd nearly finished. I didn't ask for that, she said softly. I know. She traced a finger along the edge. You think we'll need it? I think we might, he said. Someday, she turned to him, eyes searching. Are you ready for that? I've been ready for a long while, he said. Just didn't know who I was waiting on. Brielle stepped to him, her hands resting against his chest. I never thought I'd get to choose again. Not like this. You're not just choosing me, he said. You're choosing the life we make together, one that's yours in every way. She leaned her cheek into his shoulder. Then I want it, all of it. In the weeks that followed, they began preparing for the spring journey to town. The preacher there was a quiet man who'd married folks on the same porch for 30 years. Brielle stitched a dress from soft blue calico, and Jacob oiled his best boots. One morning, as the snow began to thin along the southern rise, Kira brought in a wildflower just barely blooming from under the drifts. She handed it to Jacob with a grin, its petals trembling in the cold air. "For Mama," she said. He gave it to Brielle, who pressed it between pages of a book she'd found in the loft, the one with the binding all but gone. "No one's ever given me something just because it was pretty," she said, voice barely above a hush. Jacob brushed a curl from her cheek. "Then we've got a lifetime of firsts ahead." And she smiled, not the cautious kind, but the kind that came from somewhere rooted deep and sure. The snow receded slow and stubborn, revealing the winter-crushed grass in patches across the yard. With March came warmth in the wind, tentative, but Brielle and Kira began spending more time outside, her boots leaving wet prints across the porch where she peeled them off before coming in. Brielle stood at the table threading ribbon through the hem of her dress, the one she'd made for the wedding. Her hands worked steady, but her eyes flicked now and then toward the window where Kira played with a length of string and a pine cone fashioned into a doll. Jacob came in with his arms full of split wood and paused to watch her. "You'll be the finest-looking woman that preacher's ever married," he said. She didn't look up. "I've never worn blue before." Jacob set the wood by the stove, brushing bark from his sleeves. "You wear it like it always belonged to you." Brielle smiled faintly and tied off the ribbon. "I suppose I'm still getting used to belonging." That night, when Kira had settled into sleep, Brielle stood brushing her hair near the hearth. Jacob leaned against the doorframe, watching the firelight move across her shoulder. "You ever think about going back east?" he asked. She shook her head. "There's nothing back there for me. No people you'd want Kira to know." She paused, then set the brush down. "My father's buried in Missouri. I don't know where my mother ended up. I think sometimes about the street we lived on, the way the trees arched overhead in summer, but the rest, no. I wouldn't take her back to that." Jacob crossed the room and took her hand. "I can't give her a grand life, but I can give her one that's good." "She has that already," Brielle said, "because of you." The Sunday before they rode to town, Jacob hitched the wagon and checked the harness twice over. He'd borrowed a team from the neighbor, bigger than his mare alone could manage. Kira bounced on the porch steps with a bonnet tied crooked under her chin, holding tight to a scrap of bread Brielle had given her for the ride. Brielle stepped down in her blue dress, the hem grazing her boots. She carried a shawl over one arm and her other hand rested lightly on Kira's shoulder. Jacob offered his hand, helping them up into the wagon. "It's a good day for it," he said. The ride took most of the morning. The road was soft in places, but the sun stayed out, and the hills rolled away into pine and thawing creeks. Kira leaned against Brielle's arm and pointed out birds returning to the trees. They reached the town near midday. The preacher stood waiting on the steps of the clapboard chapel, a book in one hand, his hat in the other. He nodded when he saw them and said nothing unnecessary. Inside, the room smelled faintly of cedar and dust. There were no pews, only benches. Jacob stood tall in his clean shirt and boots polished with lard. Brielle's hands didn't shake when she took his. The preacher looked between them. "You come here of your own will." "We do," Jacob said. "I do," Brielle echoed, her voice strong. The words came simple and plain. No grandness, no scripture more than what was needed. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Brielle let out a breath that trembled at the end, not from fear, but from something long held finally let go. Outside, Kira clapped her hands and ran to Jacob, who lifted her and kissed the top of her head. "You've got my name now, too," he said. Brielle watched them, her hand resting on her belly where she'd begun to feel the faintest changes. She hadn't told him yet. Not because she doubted his heart, but because she wanted the moment to be hers first, to feel it settle in her bones before giving it away. That night, back at the cabin, the three of them shared a supper of stew and cornbread, and afterward, Jacob brought out the small carved whistle he'd finished weeks before. He handed it to Kira with a smile. She held it like something sacred. Brielle sat beside Jacob on the bench, her head resting against his shoulder. "You ever think you'd end up like this?" He shook his head. "Didn't think I had the right." She reached for his hand. "You do." "We both do." Later, when the fire dimmed and Kira slept wrapped in quilts nearby, Brielle stood barefoot near the open door, the cool spring air moving across her skin. Jacob stepped behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. She took his hand and laid it gently across her stomach. He stilled. "Are you sure?" he asked, voice low. She nodded. "I wanted to wait until it felt real, but it's real now." He turned her slowly, looking into her face. "You're not afraid?" "I was," she said, "but not anymore." Jacob pressed his forehead to hers. "We'll raise this one together." Right from the beginning, Brielle kissed him, slow and sure. "That's all I want." The weeks that followed were full of small things. Jacob finished the cradle. Brielle planted early spinach in a patch near the barn. Kira carried stones from the creek to border the garden. They lived in rhythm with the land, with each other. No grand declarations, just the steady, quiet building of a life. One warm afternoon toward the end of April, Brielle hung linens in the sun while Jacob repaired a broken hinge on the barn door. Kira played nearby with her pine cone doll, now dressed in a scrap of linen and named after the preacher's wife. Jacob looked up from his work, wiping sweat from his brow, and watched them. Brielle turned, sensing his gaze, and smiled, not the tentative smile of a woman unsure of her footing, but the full, open smile of someone who had chosen her place in the world and found it solid beneath her. He crossed the yard, pulled her gently into his arms, and kissed her beneath the drying sheets. Kira laughed and ran circles around them, shouting nonsense into the wind, and that, more than anything, became the shape of their days, not dramatic, not fast, just full of warmth, of trust, of the kind of love that grows steady and deep, anchored by what came before and made stronger by everything still to come.